is Tuesday, June 19th, 2024. My name is Nia Salway, and I am in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Joining me in person for an oral history interview is Maya Johnson. This interview is a part of an oral history project that is documenting the family histories of descendants of the Fractions and the Prestons whose ancestors lived at Solitude and Smithfield plantations in Blacksburg, Virginia. Thank you, Maya, for your willingness to share your story. Do I have your permission to record this interview?
Yes, you do.
Thank you. Could you please state your full name for the record?
My full name is Maya Angelou Johnson.
Thank you. I want to begin with when and where you were born.
I was born in the Twin Cities area in St. Louis Park, Minnesota, technically, and grew up kind of all over the Twin Cities. I've been here my whole life.
Really? Could you tell me about your family and what it was like growing up in the Twin Cities?
My family is, I would consider, kind of a more traditional family nowadays. I grew up with parents that divorced when I was about 7 years old, and a lot of my childhood was spent going back and forth and spending time with the both of them. I have a younger brother that's about 6 years younger than me, and have a very close relationship. We grew up kind of moving to and fro together, which created quite a bond for the two of us. And I grew up in a city where pretty much all of my extended family lived in the same area. So my childhood is really rich with memories of spending time with a lot of my extended family, as a very natural extension of my immediate nuclear family. They kind of are all one and the same to me. So a lot of cousins, aunts, uncles, my grandparents. I grew up in an environment where I was constantly spending time with everybody, which was the best.
Would you mind sharing with us some of those memories?
Yeah. The most fond memories that I have are spending time with all of my cousins and at my grandparents' home in Pequot Lakes. I often say that home, their home, was my favorite place in the world. It was on a lake about 2 hours north of here, and was really just a place of solitude for me. And so I had a lot of memories there, being on the water with my cousins, tubing, having a bonfire, grilling, spending time together for days at a time. We often would spend like a week at a time up there over the 4th of July holiday, because that's typically when a lot of people just can come together. And it was just this kind of like mass overtaking of the town, our family kind of flooding in, and that is really one of those memories are my fondest memories. Doing karaoke together, family trivia, learning about our grandparents and other people in our family we might not know about, game nights and all those sorts of things. I just have really fond memories of our like largest gatherings that we'd have every year.
I love that. What were some of the things you remember hearing about your grandparents?
Hearing about my grandparents, I am on the younger end of all of the grandchildren. So I feel like I learned a lot more about my grandparents from hearing from my cousins and aunts and uncles, my parents, as opposed to my older cousins that spent a lot of time with my grandparents. I didn't do that as much, being kind of one of the younger folks. But I just remember learning a lot about their differing personalities that were so complementary to each other. My grandpa, very like stern and quiet and composed and cautious. And my grandma, very vivacious and outgoing. And their personalities really matched each other. So I remember learning and observing a lot of that as a young child. As a little kid, I was probably a little afraid of my grandfather because he had such a strong presence. And as I got older and closer to him over time, I learned that really is more just his demeanor. And, we developed a really special relationship. So I remember learning a lot about those things, learning about my grandfather being in the military. And that was something that he didn't discuss a lot. I think was a challenging time for him. I think a time where he went through a lot that maybe as grandchildren we didn't always hear about. And then learning about my grandma's family, kind of migrating to Minneapolis and to the cities in Minnesota from Iowa, and kind of learning about all of those things, definitely secondhand. more than firsthand. So my grandfather, Everett Johnson, was a very strong personality, not in an outgoing way, and just in his presence. A lot of my cousins and I have tattoos of elephants for him to honor him, because that was very much representative of his personality, very large and strong and wise, but quiet. So that's what I always grew up observing as a child. But he would have moments where he'd show his goofy side and come out of his shell and, have really sweet banter with my grandmother and things like that. My brother, Connor, is actually very similar to my grandfather in that way. And they also look very similar. A lot of people in our family say my brother is kind of the spitting image of my grandfather when he was younger. So that is a really sweet way for his presence to kind of still to be with us. But as I got older, he passed away right as I was graduating college. And in the few years before he passed, a lot of the conversations that I remember with him were centered around my interest in social justice, in the law, and politics. He was very tuned into those sorts of things and, watched a lot of news and things like that. And so a lot of our conversations centered around my interest in those things, which was really special. And those are a lot of the memories that I hold. My favorite story of my grandfather is when I was really young. We all would fish on the dock at their house up north, and I had a little pink Barbie fishing pole, a very small fishing pole for a little girl, and I must have dropped it in the water, or a fish nibbled on it, and it got pulled into the water, and he dove into the water to save it for me. And I just always found that so special. It was a silly thing. It would probably cost maybe $10. We probably could have gotten another one, but that was also something I remember is he was a big swimmer and was a very strong athlete and swimmer, and would swim the course of the lake that they lived on, and found it important enough to dive and get my fishing pole. And then that fishing pole sat in one of the front porches of their house forever as kind of a little memento hung on the wall, and I always found that so special. I'd make sure to go check it out anytime we were up there. So, yeah.
What were one of the most valuable things you took from your conversations with him when considering your career in social justice?
That's a good question. I don't know if it was kind of before I really found the true trajectory of where I wanted to take my career. I mean, I was a college student. I think I thought I knew, but didn't really have a ton of understanding at the time. But I just remember having kind of conversations about the state of the world, and I think he would read a lot of newspapers or ask me if I had heard about these things. And I think is his introverted way of finding connection with me. Mm-hmm. And so I just remember a lot of those kind of conversations. And I think when I look back on them, I think of really just how his investment in hearing about where I was at and finding common interests kind of resonated with me and made me feel very seen. I mentioned as one of those younger grandkids, and kind of me coming into the world. So I don't know if I was at a place where I was maybe wise enough to internalize some of those conversations and take them with me at the time, but I just remember it sticks out to me because I just remember it being a really genuine moment of connection for the two of us.
Yeah, I love that. What about your grandmother? What were some ways that you connected with your grandma?
With my grandma, there was a lot of fun ways I feel like we connected through song and dance, and through, spending time at their home, her in the kitchen cooking for us, or we'd arrive at their house after a very long, a long road trip up there, driving in the car a couple hours to visit them, and walking in the house and turning in, she was right there in the kitchen, is the image of her that I always have in my brain. Some nights, not too long after my grandfather passed away and she was still living up at the lake by herself, myself and a few of my cousins did a road trip up there to spend the night with her and to help her clean some things out. And I just remember that being the funnest night and her just being so giddy and excited we were up there. And watching old family videos together and teasing us, poking fun at us, and us cleaning out an old closet in her basement and her just having a brilliant story for why she had to keep every single thing that was in there and we couldn't get rid of it. And so a lot of memories like that. Her favorite song was Green Onions. That was her favorite song. Anytime it came on, she'd have to get up and stop what she was doing and dance to it. And so as kids, as older grandkids, would dance with that to her too. So those are some of the memories that really stick out to me as well.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Can you share any family celebrations or traditions that you remember?
I mean, our 4th of July celebration was really our biggest tradition. I mean, yes, they would come down and spend Thanksgivings with us and Christmas with us and holidays and things like that were more traditional, but that coming together was always kind of our biggest tradition we'd look forward to every year, and finding new ways to celebrate and activities for the kids to do and things like that. I actually was going through my phone, images in my phone not that long ago, and I had a bunch of screenshots of Facebook messages. And I was like, what are these? I was about to delete them, and I realized they were messages that I had with her as we were preparing for one of those 4th of July vacations. And her and I were trying to find games to do, or I told her I wanted to do like a family trivia game. And she was sending me all these fun facts that I could include. And, I bet you didn't know your grandma was a beauty pageant queen and all of these really special things. And I was so glad I thought to save those images to look back on those conversations, and that her and my grandpa were going to come up with a few questions together. And preparing for that tradition, that is really what is, my fondest tradition and memory as a kid. And it's hard that we don't have that anymore. It feels like we don't have that touch point where it's as easy for us all to get together as it used to be. But yeah, that is by far the best tradition we had, and was very much just like a family reunion every summer, which was really special.
I love that. And it seems like the rest of your family finds it very special to them as well.
Definitely. I think something that sticks out to a lot of us, and it was something, I don't know how long we did that, far before I was born, I imagine, and was just something that was really, there were probably 50 of us that would come up and either stay at their house or at a hotel near their house. Some people would camp on their front yard because they couldn't stay in a hotel or things like that. It was just like pure chaos for days, but it was the most fun, and it's a really special way for people to spend time together and with our grandparents for the most part.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's really just the little things.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Quality time.
Yes.
Can you tell me what grade school was like for you?
Yeah, great. My hesitation to your question is I don't know if I remember a ton of it. Interestingly enough, I think a lot of my more formative years are a little cloudy in my brain at times. My parents were getting divorced around that time, and so I have some very clear memories here, but not everywhere. But it was good. I remember being at schools that were really welcoming to me, that really fostered my creativity or my exploration into school and enjoying school. I never was in an environment where I felt like I didn't enjoy school. I moved schools a couple times, so that I think I was at one school for kindergarten, one for first grade, and then 2nd through 5th grade I was in a school for kind of my longest stretch of time. So there was a little bit of shifting around that I think also maybe influenced that. But I remember having great fond memories. My main memory that comes to mind is that I cracked my head open when I was in the 2nd grade. That's kind of my grade school memory is, I was messing around before class or something and I fell and hit my head on the ground and had to get stitches. And so I was known for that for a long time. And just having teachers that were really caring and supportive, and, nurses that believed me when I said I was hurt or not feeling good because I went through this experience. So, I have pretty fond, normal memories, I would say, of my grade school years.
That's good. I'm glad you're fairly supportive.
Yes, yeah.
Do you recall, and this doesn't have to be in a school setting, but do you recall ever facing any racial challenges growing up in the Twin Cities?
Yeah, I would say in a way. I think I'm pretty... Sorry, I just want to make sure it's good. I would say yes and no. And I like to always... Maybe this isn't necessary, but I always like to put a caveat on answers to these kinds of questions, as they definitely are not as grave as other experiences that folks have had in the like racial dynamics of Twin Cities, Minneapolis, and St. Paul. But Minnesota is a state where there's a lot of biracial people. It's very common, more common than other places that I've been to, that's for sure. And I don't know if I could explain why that is. Maybe, you know, there's myself, a lot of my cousins, we have similar experiences that way. And so that experience has always been interesting. I think it's a pretty common biracial experience to have a really hard time figuring out where you belong because of that blended identity. You know, I've had a lot of spaces where people don't really understand what my background is because you couldn't tell by looking when I was younger. You know, I remember in elementary school, actually, now that you ask, I remember in elementary school, girls like pulling on my hair and asking if it was a weave or a wig or things like that. Comments about my hair on my arms that stood out more than others. Like things like that, I remember getting a lot of curiosity and comments about it that didn't always land well. And also feeling outside of my family like you're not Black enough or don't fit the African American experience enough. And so that is always something that I've struggled with. I think as I've gotten older, I've accepted a lot more, understood a lot more, and I think it took me having a really supportive partner to help me explore that and almost validate my experience as a Black woman in America that has a very different experience than other Black women, to be very clear. And I always was nervous to, I think, speak on that because I don't ever want to seem like my experiences invalidate that of others. And so even though I'm in a place geographically that has a lot of people probably with similar experiences, it's always been a sensitive topic for me because I want to acknowledge women like my grandmother, my aunts that have had truly challenging experiences in this city. Our city has a really interesting racial history that I think has beautiful pieces and really challenging pieces too. So I've always had that, you know, kind of pull both ways, and luckily nothing like truly traumatizing for me. I think it's been more of an internal struggle that I've kind of grown up with, but I think I've figured it out. I think I've settled into where I lie in the grand scheme of the human race, I guess.
I love that. What advice would you give to other Black biracial women?
I would say immediately be aware of the privilege that you hold and be a voice for others and use that privilege to be a voice for others. Not that those others don't have their own voices, but be a person that can amplify the stories and the lived experience of others is really important to me. I'm not going to harp on like how hard it has been being a biracial woman when I know there are a lot of people that have much more complex and challenging history with race in America. So that is my biggest piece of advice. And I also think it really is to just, you know, root yourself in where you feel comfortable and don't deny a piece of you that is very present, whether it doesn't show up as clearly in your skin or your hair or whatever the case might be. I think depending on how you're raised and the dynamic in which you're raised as a biracial person, that can become a factor too. I've been very lucky to have a white mother that has really fostered that confidence in me. For goodness sakes, my name is Maya Angelou. So I think that's always been something that's been encouraged. And I think you just need to, you know, find where you feel you can contribute to others, advocate for others, but also take care of yourself too. And know that's okay. That doesn't take away from anything else.
And it's important because you have to start with yourself.
Definitely.
Yeah. Thank you. I love that. Thank you for sharing that with us. I want to return back to your education
Yeah.
Journey and ask, what college did you go to?
I went to St. Catherine University, which is a Catholic women's college in St. Paul, Minnesota. Happens to be where my mom went to college. And yeah, so a very small, local, private school in the Twin Cities area.
What did you study?
I studied social work for the first 3 years of my education. And while I was studying social work, I explored the idea of going into pre-law as well. And then my last year of college, I switched to being a full like government and political science student, which is, I can explain why if you like, but
Yes, please.
I knew going into college, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to help other people, right? Like that's, I think, a motivation a lot of people have. I wanted to help others, but I didn't know how or what that meant or ways in which you could do that. And so I was like, social work, that seems like a really clear way to do that. And I progressed quite a ways through my social work program, and it was a really valuable education. The school I went to is pretty well known for social work education in the area. And so I knew that might be the way. And as I got further into the program, I often found myself in externships and internships and things like that, getting frustrated that I couldn't help people more, that it was often the same type of issues, the same struggles people were facing coming in and out the door. And it was kind of like putting a Band-Aid on these issues over and over again, as opposed to getting to the real root of what was causing families in this area to go through those issues. And so that was when my interest into going to law school peaked. I never knew anyone that went to law school. At that point, I didn't really have any attorneys in my family, or even proximate to me. So I didn't really know what that meant, but in my brain, that was kind of the logical step to take. And that's when I decided in my last year to switch into like a government and political science degree. But then I had that social welfare concentration as well. So
I love that.
Yeah.
As an attorney, what do you enjoy most about your job?
I enjoy... my instinct was to say that I hold a lot of power, but that's silly to say. What I mean by that is you meet people typically at their pretty worst time. You are meeting people at a point in their life that is very influential, and you hold a lot of responsibility in being able to advocate for them, find solutions to their issues, and hopefully improve the situation they're in. Of course, that's not always the case. There are legal ways you can meet people in really beautiful situations, but that's usually more of the exception than the rule, unfortunately. And so I think my favorite part of it is playing that influential role and changing the narrative of what an attorney is like. In the kind of line of work I do, people typically have not always had great experiences with attorneys leading up to where I meet them at. And so to be able to shift that narrative and give them a different perspective, that there are attorneys out there that will listen, advocate for them, understand where they're at, that is really important to me, and really just see them as humans, as opposed to a client or a case file or a win or a loss. It's really important to me to meet people in their humanity and what they're going through, and be a place of relief for them or comfort for them, and take some of that anxiety away from what they might be going through.
Right. That's really important too, for them to get out of the situation that they're in. I appreciate that. In your email, your sign-off is Legal Revolution.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask what that means to you.
It means a lot of things to me. I work for a very wonderful organization called Legal Revolution, and that means shifting the narrative of what it means to be in the legal field. We work with folks that are currently incarcerated or formerly incarcerated and want to take their experience in the legal system, the criminal legal system, to make it better. Oftentimes their voices have been very excluded from the practice of law. You're the client, you aren't the lawyer, you don't know the law, and that's very often not been the case. This country and all over the world really has a really rich history of what is called quote-unquote jailhouse lawyers. and people in prisons across the country that know the law far better than I do, and I went to law school for 3 years to learn it. But when your life doesn't depend on learning it, when you aren't forced to learn it from a place of survival or freedom, you're not as invested as people that teach themselves the law. And so to me, legal revolution means taking this really old traditional practice and career and making it more representative, making it more democratic, and bringing more voices into the fold to make the system better. Because obviously it doesn't work in the way that it should for everyone. And what we're trying to do with legal revolution is create this revolution that changes that by bringing new perspective into the fold. So it's a pretty powerful statement. We definitely weren't playing around with it when we came up with it. It catches people's attention for sure. But I think it starts that conversation, which is really important.
Right. Are you comfortable sharing what you guys do in particular to kind of change that narrative? So
at Legal Revolution, we hold 2 kind of main components or programs. One is a law firm team that we have that takes on more traditional cases and helps people that are justice impacted with different civil related legal needs. So you might be coming home from prison and need your driver's license back. You want to visit your children again. You want to start a business because it's hard for you to find a job with a record. We have a legal team that does a lot of that advocacy and education in the community on different areas of law that might be relevant to people that are justice impacted or system involved. And then on the other side, we have a program called the Prison to Law Pipeline Program. That's how I originally got involved with the organization, was as the director of that program. And we work with folks that are currently incarcerated, like I mentioned, that want to use that lived experience to study and learn the law. So we work with students that are currently incarcerated in a few correctional facilities in Minnesota, go to school to get their paralegal degree, or go to law school. And so we like to believe, from what we can tell based on research, we're hosting the first ABA-approved paralegal program in a prison. There have been non-approved programs before, but ours is approved and accredited by the legal field. And we have our program hosts the first 2 incarcerated law students in the country. So I'm really lucky. I get to work directly with those students and help them kind of discover what their interests are, what their why is, why they want to pursue law school. So I actually am not really practicing in a traditional way day to day. I'm not going into courtrooms. I'm not doing trials or hearings or things like that. I like to think of my law degree as a sacrificial law degree. I got it to help others who I feel's perspective is really important to be integrated into the law, help them get there. And so it's just been the most exciting process. But yeah, we operate kind of like a scholarship program where we cover a lot of the costs and the technology and logistics and supporting them access that education with the hopes that they can then get out and become licensed and use their experience to help others, whether it's through lobbying or becoming an actual licensed attorney, things like that. So that's a little bit about what we do.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. If you could use legal revolution to help your ancestors, how would you do that?
That's a really beautiful question. I think there's a big parallel there, right? Like I talked about people that are incarcerated or have lived through incarceration teaching themselves the law as a means of survival. You know, knowing what I know about my ancestors, but the ancestors of many, there's, I imagine, of course, that same education and teaching and community learning as a means of survival, right? And so the law we still see today was crafted and created in ways that really marginalized, penalized, and harmed many communities. And I think by centering voices most impacted by that harm and damage into the law, I think that had that happened so many years ago, we might see a lot of changes in our laws today in the way police operate, legal systems operate, our sentencing operates. And I think you see a lot of parallel in criminal law and sentencing of humans and incarceration, slave labor. There's a lot of overlap there. So your question hits me in actually a very beautiful way. I think in a very dark, deep way. But I think there's a lot of continuation of that struggle. And I would hope I could use Legal Revolution just as an advocacy tool and as a way to amplify the voices of those that went through struggle and that survived through obstacle and harm and got where they went today. Because a lot of people that I work with now are doing the same thing. Right. So, yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but
thank you.
that's kind of where it landed with me.
Yeah. I kind of want to shift a little bit to your family and ask, well, you shared with me that your paternal grandmother is who connects you to the Fraction lineage, so I wanted you to, if you don't mind, talk a little bit more about the things that you remember about her, aside from, like, the little interactions that you shared before, just things that you remember about her when you were around her. Yes. Observing and things like that. I remember her being a very larger than life woman, a very professional, impressive woman. I remember learning a lot about her career. She blazed a lot of paths in Minnesota, in particular, as a Black woman in professional spaces. I think for my other cousins and I, the girls in our family, I think that set a very strong example for us. I think we all are in pursuit of really influential careers, and I think her blazing a lot of those trails in the spaces that she did set an example for that. I remember her welcoming in anyone who inhibited our space, regardless of who you are, where you came from, or who your parents are, or are you married, divorced, estranged. Everybody was welcomed and brought in. She was a human that really, I think, connected people in many ways. And if she loved you no matter what, no questions asked. I think those are some of the pieces that I remember quite a bit. I also remember her, experiencing a lot of loss. I don't know why that stands out to me. She had siblings that she lost pretty prematurely. And as she grew older, her and a few of her siblings were kind of the last few remaining of their generation. And I do remember that being a piece that I was pretty cognizant for, and remember quite a bit. And then I just remember her, like, sense of style, her just, like, zest is the word that comes to mind. And as I'm kind of looking through my house, that was, like, in her clothes and her decorations and every piece of her. But as I look through my house and I see a lot of reminders of her that I've collected and put in my own home, I think that, like, sense of style and those sorts of things stand out to me as well. Yeah. You said she was a trailblazer. What are some of the things that she did in her career that you...
I mean, I won't lie to you. I probably can't do this answer justice in the way maybe some of my aunts or uncles could. But from what I know, she did a lot of work and held roles at U.S. Bank. I've seen a lot of newspaper articles about her as, the first Black woman to do this or hold this role in the HR space. And so that is something that I remember, the details of which I probably couldn't give you, which is a regret I have, frankly. I know when they moved up, her and my grandfather moved up to the Pequot Lakes area, which is this small town in northern Minnesota. Definitely were not really Black people in the area at all. And they planted themselves in that town and became really well-known folks and elders in that town. And built really close relationships with those around them. And I believe she also was part of some, like, board or part of government there. But she worked in the banking system for quite a long time, which is also a pretty, like, maybe stuffy kind of environment to work for. So what's really special is my fiance and my brother now work for U.S. Bank, which is where a lot of her career was. Yeah. So I feel like she's, like, smiling down on us about that. I think it's kind of a really beautiful full circle moment. Mm-hmm. For sure.
And to hear that she was a very proud woman, but it's very comforting to know that she's very proud of you all.
Yeah, definitely very proud. I mean, in her you know, they live really far away, so it was often hard for them to be able to come or be present at everything we had going on. But I remember her coming to different like presentations I had in college, celebrating me, at, you know, graduations, presentations, things like that. Always just being there when she could, being very proud of all of the wide array of things her grandchildren were doing. So definitely very proud, but in a very like humble and respectful way.
I love that. And your father is Gregory, who we spoke with yesterday. So I wanted to know, what is the most valuable lesson your father has taught you?
You might decline that one.
That's okay.
I might decline that one.
Would you mind answering, what's a piece of advice or something significant someone shared with you that has stuck with you ever since they told you?
Yeah, just give me 1 second.
Take your time.
That's a good question. And I feel like the one that normally comes to my brain is escaping me right now. So maybe it wasn't that strong of a piece of advice. I think the best piece of advice that I've gotten is that two things can always be true. I think that is a piece of advice I try to carry with me in my personal relationships, my professional work and relationships, is that two things can always be true. And I think it just, I don't know if that's something that my grandmother actually ever like verbally told me, but I think that's how she carried herself, and like acknowledging that there are a lot of layers to situations, to human beings. And that, you know, it might be true, one thing or perspective might be true to you, and it might look very different for someone else. And I think that is something that I try to remind myself quite a bit when I'm either frustrated about something or really excited about something. You know, that may be true for me in this moment, or for someone else, their perspective might be true, and it's okay that another thing is true as well.
As you have learned more about your family's deeper history, what has the process of discovering that ancestry been like for you?
It's been really special. It's actually, for me, gone back to my college years. As a college student, I was in a research program that actually was led, coincidentally, by my dad's cousin, Cynthia Fraction. And she was working at the University of St. Thomas at the time, and you know, my aunts connected me to this program and encouraged me to apply for it, where I could do a research project on anything I'd like. And at the time, I believe I was learning a lot more about the city of St. Paul. I was living in St. Paul, going to school there. And we, like many cities across the country, have a very common highway here that has historically torn down Black communities in the Twin Cities area. And so I wanted to embark on a research project about that. And going through that research project, I actually learned about my grandmother's family, her parents, and her grandparents owning homes in those neighborhoods that were demolished and torn down and ripped away from people. So that was really kind of my first introduction into really learning about my lineage, my ancestry, in a little bit closer way, not as far removed, but doing it in a way where I got to study by ethnography and interviewing elders that still lived really proximate to those communities and learning about the impact. And in a way, I was learning about what my great-grandparents were going through, because I never had the opportunity to meet them as an adult and be able to learn those things from them. So that's where it started for me. And then I think this project in particular, and learning about the journey of my ancestors, really just grounds me quite a bit. I often think of obstacles or struggles or the folks I work with on a day-to-day basis, and it puts a lot of things in perspective for me. I think it really puts in perspective different challenges or struggles and stresses I face, and I try to lean on the amazing stories and things I've learned about them and try to ground that in myself to go through the maybe more trivial things that folks experience today, or more serious things too. I try to take that with me. So learning about all of this over time has been really impactful in that way.
I love that. If you could talk with your ancestors, what would you want to know?
I think I would want to know how they found and built and fostered community. That might be maybe an answer for them that might be easy or clear, maybe more challenging to answer, I don't know. But I'd want to find ways in which human connection got them through, or human connection made their lives more rich. I think that concept of community being whatever it means to you is really special, and I'd want to know what that looked like for them and how they fostered community and relationships that could be fractured or fractioned, things like
that. Clever.
Thanks.
What would you want them to know about you in your life?
I would want them to know that I carry to the best that I can, their journeys and their lived experience with me to the extent I'm able, and that I try to live my life in a way that is giving to others and seeing others as human and being a connection point or a point of community for people that are enslaved, that are caged, imprisoned, that I hold those people in challenging circumstances very dear to my heart, and I do whatever I can in my day-to-day life to make them heard and seen and cared for.
Yeah, I love that. I think they would be very proud of you.
Thank you.
To hear that. What message would you want to share with your future descendants?
I think something very similar. I would hope that they take care of the community and the relationships in their lives, and that they really foster those, and not to stray too far from where you come from. That often those relationships and connections and blood bonds are the most beautiful that you can have. I think that's very important to me. And to also live your life in a way where, regardless of what the cause is or the population is, that you are living a life of service to others in some way, and thinking of others in all that you do, I think is very important.
I do too. What does reconciliation with the history of slavery mean to you?
I think that means using knowledge of the centuries that slavery is present in this country to do better now. I think reconciling with it means, in the face of it, knowing about it, learning about it, that we do better now and care for humans in very similar conditions, or maybe comparable conditions. I won't say similar. I think it means not reconciling with slavery. To me, means it being very omnipresent in my day-to-day life. Yeah, that's a challenging question.
It is.
But I think to me it means, I think of the very cliche, like you learn history so history does not repeat itself. And when you know better, you do better. I think this country has a very challenging acceptance of that concept, even though it's spoken about a lot. And to me, I think it really just means analyzing the systems and the treatment of human beings now, and making sure that those things are as far apart as possible. Yeah.
Thank you. Is there a difference in your mind between reconciliation and reparation?
Maybe a little bit. To me, reconciliation, well, there might be a lot more overlap than I maybe instinctually think. But to me, reconciliation, my instinct is that that is really about learning and understanding, implementing change based on our knowledge today. I think reparation is where that takes a lot more action. And yeah, I think that's probably maybe where the difference lies for me.
I'm in deep admiration for your sense of justice.
Thank you.
Where does that come from?
That's a really good question. I mean, to be very honest, it has to come from somewhere, because I work with people that have been impacted by the system. I myself am not. My family members, for the most part, are not. And so I had to find that somewhere. I think to me is really about exposure. And I think that concept of, in my organization, our line of work, we often say both second chances and reparations are very critical. And I think oftentimes people think of justice as, punishment. Like, that is how a lot of people, I think, frame justice. And I think the more, as a law student, I was exposed to folks that have been put to justice, quote unquote, I just, from human to human connection, found a lot of humanity and community in those folks. And I've met the most humble, kind, thoughtful people in those situations and incarceration, that it really caused me to think through what this system we have as a country means. And I think I've always really struggled with that. Of course, human beings make mistakes. Of course, human beings cause harm. But I think how we respond to those harms as community in a very transformative way, restorative way, is really important. And so I think I've honestly found it by becoming proximate to the issue. I think it's very easy for a lot of people to never become proximate to somebody that is in prison or has been to prison. But in doing so, I don't think I could remove myself knowing about those people that are often like beyond the wall or behind a wall. And I think I really just became so connected to the humans that I think that you can't overlook justice when that is what is tied to it. So, I found my way here, and I'm very grateful this early in my career. That's something that I can center so blatantly. But yeah.
As someone who's worked with people entrapped by the carceral system, I know that the vicarious trauma is a very real thing to deal with. What does self-care look like for you? Yeah.
That's a great question. Self-care, I mean, truthfully, to me, it is time with others. I need some of that human-to-human connection to recharge myself, take care of myself. And I think just being in conversation with others. It's hard because there are times where I do feel like I need to unplug or care for myself, but I often am rooted in the fact that the people that I'm working with don't get to do that. And so that's a really hard thing to hold. It's a very privileged thing to be able to hold, to be able to say I need to step back and unplug for a minute. But I think I just really try to ground myself in nature and community with other people, and connecting with people as much as I can. But
Thank you. I do have more questions, but Kira, would you like to ask a few?
No, DJ Dr. Higgins. I do not.
Thank you, Dr. Moseley-Hobbs. Would you be interested in talking with the Prestons, the family who enslaved the Fractions?
I think I would be.
What would you want to say or learn from them?
I think I'd have more curiosities, and I think I'd probably have things to say, just knowing myself in the moment. I think probably wanting to return back to that question of reconciliation and reconciling their familial history, what they do in their day-to-day life, whether it's directly related to this or elsewhere, like what they do in their day-to-day life to reconcile with that history. Yeah.
I want to ask you a new question that I'm inspired. So this is off the cuff. If you were to add a restorative or a reparative justice framework to a project like this, what would that look like?
I think it would look like the question you just asked me. I think that is... I've learned about the concept of restorative justice from very brilliant humans that I get to work with that have been incarcerated and that embark on restorative justice in that context. Sitting in a space, in a circle with somebody that you have caused harm and having conversation to come to a place of understanding, maybe to reconciliation, to peace. And so I think it, to me, would look like the question you just asked me. I think it would look like, the benefit of somewhat of like a intimate roundtable conversation. And that might be hard because I know that this spans far and wide, right? Not to a small group of people. But I think it would look like integrating restorative justice would look like those uncomfortable conversations in space together from all sides of harm that has been caused, and understanding the impact, understanding the why, the how, all of those sorts of things.
Are there questions that you think we should be asking that you haven't heard us ask yet?
I kind of like talking about the matriarchal setup of our family. I think that is really special for me to acknowledge. Maybe how that's influenced me a little bit. I don't know.
Tell me about that.
I spoke a little bit about the dynamic between my grandparents. My grandfather is very quiet and sat back. My grandmother, much more outgoing and social. And I feel like growing up, I always witnessed a household where the woman led, in a way. Of course, my grandfather led their family, our family, but I think my grandmother always has been kind of the matriarch that has brought us all together, and has really been the cornerstone of our family. And there are a good amount of us girls, granddaughters, and I think we've all learned a lot from that. I think to me that's a very special thing to grow up with and witness. I think it's helped me not question myself or have confidence in myself in spaces or in leadership positions, because having that example for me has made that a little more second nature. It doesn't mean I do it perfectly, and I still have self-doubt or imposter syndrome here and there, but I think growing up with that type of beautiful matriarch as a presence has given me that very women can do anything and they run this world kind of attitude, and I definitely know I've gotten that from my grandmother. So yeah.
Thank you for that. I'll ask one more question and then I'll give it back over to Nia, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
oral history is really powerful in that not only does it document a more distant past, but it also records the present moment. And that could look like in your personal life, in your family, in your life and times, the context in which we live. I'm curious, what message would you want future generations to know if they look back at this moment in time?
That's a good question. I think I'd want... I'm at a very fun place in my life right now where I'm embarking on creating my own family in a way. And a new branch to our tree. And I think I'd want to leave the advice or the thought about staying connected as much as you can to your familial tree and the beauty that holds, regardless of what your ancestral last name is or where you are descending from. To stay really connected to those people, and that the creation of your own new line is very beautiful and very special. That's just kind of something that's top of my mind right now, or really on my heart, because I'm getting to do that and it's very exciting. But in doing that, I bring a lot of the lessons learned from the family and love that I've seen come before me. A lot of the energy that I think I bring into my relationship and my future family, I think is energies that I've pulled a lot from my grandparents. And so I think taking that in and letting that be an influence for the positive for you as an individual, I think is a gift that we can't take for granted.
It's powerful, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about, maybe that we haven't asked or that you would like to return to?
I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I think that's been great. Really wonderful questions.
Thank you. Well, we want to thank you again for sharing your story with us today and helping us connect the legacy of enslavement to the present lives of American descendants.
Thank you.
Thank you.